I laughed in his face when my sister set me up with a single dad who worked construction. But 3 years later, when my million-dollar company was crashing and I was facing bankruptcy, that same man I rejected became the only person who could save everything I'd built. Before we dive in, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. You're probably wondering how someone like me, Cordelia Nash, could end up so desperate that I'd crawl back to a man I'd humiliated on our first and only date. Let me tell you, pride has a way of setting you up for the most brutal falls imaginable. At 32, I was the CEO of TechFlow Solutions, a company I'd built from nothing into a $10 million powerhouse. I lived in a downtown penthouse that cost more per month than most people make in a year. I drove a Tesla that could park itself better than most people could parallel park. 3 different business magazines had put my face on their covers that year alone, calling me one of the most innovative young entrepreneurs in America. I thought I had figured out the formula for success. And part of that formula was surrounding myself with people who matched my level of ambition and achievement. So when my sister Vivian, who worked in marketing and had always been the hopeless romantic of our family, told me she'd found the perfect guy for me, I was actually excited. Finally, I thought, someone who could keep up with my world. Maybe a fellow CEO, or a successful lawyer, or even a doctor who understood what it meant to work 80-hour weeks building something from scratch. Then she told me his name was Brennan Torres, and he was a construction worker with an 8-year-old daughter. A single dad who spent his days in hard hats and work boots, probably coming home covered in dust and exhaustion. I remember the exact moment my enthusiasm died, sitting in my corner office overlooking the city, phone pressed to my ear as Vivian went on about how kind and intelligent he was. All I could think was how different our worlds were, how little we'd have in common, how awkward the conversations would be when he couldn't relate to the pressures of running a company or the thrill of closing a major deal. But Vivian had this way of wearing people down with her optimism, and she'd already told him I was interested. So I agreed to one dinner, thinking I'd get through it politely, and then gently explain to my sister why it wouldn't work out. I had no idea that this one decision, this moment of agreeing to meet someone I'd already written off, would come back to either destroy me or save me in ways I never could have imagined. Because the man I was about to meet and dismiss wasn't just a construction worker with a daughter. He was hiding skills that would one day be worth more to me than all my business degrees and magazine covers combined. Let me paint you a picture of my life 3 years ago, because understanding who I was then makes everything that happened later so much more devastating and, honestly, so much more deserved. I had built TechFlow Solutions from literally nothing. I'm talking about starting in my parents' garage with a laptop I'd bought on credit and an idea that small businesses needed better automation software. Most entrepreneurs talk about their humble beginnings, but I had actually lived them. Ramen. Noodles for dinner, sleeping on a futon mattress on the floor, wearing the same 3 blazers to every meeting because they were all I could afford. But by the time Vivian was trying to set me up with Brennan, those days felt like ancient history. My company was pulling in $10 million a year helping small businesses streamline their operations with custom software solutions. We had 47 employees, an entire floor in one of downtown's most prestigious office buildings, and clients across 12 states. My penthouse apartment had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a kitchen I never cooked in because I was always working, and a walk-in closet filled with designer suits that cost more than most people's. Monthly rent. The success had changed me in ways I didn't even recognize at the time. When you go from eating cereal for dinner to having restaurants comp your meals just so they can say you dined there. When you go from riding the bus to having a driver. When you go from being ignored at networking events to having people line up to pitch you their ideas. Something shifts inside you. You start believing that your success is entirely due to your own brilliance and hard work, and you start judging everyone else by the same impossible standards you've set for yourself. Vivian had been on my case about dating for months. She worked in marketing for a mid-sized firm downtown, and while she was successful in her own right, she didn't understand the pressure I was under. Every decision I made affected 47 families who depended on their paychecks from my company. Every contract we landed or lost could mean the difference between expanding our team or having to let people go. I didn't have time for casual dating or getting to know someone slowly over coffee dates and weekend brunches. Cordelia, you're becoming one of those workaholic CEOs who dies alone with their awards, she'd tell me during our weekly sister dinners at whatever trendy restaurant I'd picked. You need someone who gets your drive, but you also need someone who can help you remember there's life outside that office. She wasn't wrong about my isolation. I'd stopped seeing most of my college friends because their lives revolved around things that seemed trivial to me now. Happy hours and weekend trips and complaints about their bosses felt like a foreign language when I was dealing with investor presentations and expansion strategies and the constant pressure of being the final decision maker for everything. The few men I'd dated in recent years had either been intimidated by my success or had seen me as some kind of trophy to add to their own image. None of them had lasted longer than a few months. So when Vivian mentioned she'd met someone through her yoga instructor who seemed perfect for me, I was genuinely intrigued. I figured she'd finally understood what I needed. Someone with ambition and drive. Someone who could match my energy and understand my world. Maybe another entrepreneur who was building his own company, or a lawyer climbing the partnership ladder, or even a doctor who understood what it meant to dedicate your entire life to something bigger than yourself. I should have known something was off when she was unusually vague about what he did for work. Vivian had always been direct about everything, sometimes brutally honest to the point where it got her in trouble. But when I asked about Brennan's job, she just said he was in construction, and quickly changed the subject to how funny he was, how smart, how good he was with his daughter. His daughter. That should have been my first red flag, not because there's anything wrong with single fathers, but because I knew myself well enough to know I wasn't ready to be anyone's stepmother. I could barely manage to keep a plant alive in my apartment, and now I was supposed to consider dating someone whose life revolved around school pickup times and soccer practices and all the complicated logistics of raising a child. But I'd already committed to the date, and backing out felt cowardly. Besides, I told myself, one dinner wouldn't kill me. I could be polite, maybe even enjoy myself, and then gently explain to Vivian afterward why we weren't compatible. I had no idea I was walking into the most humbling experience of my adult life, one that would expose every ugly assumption I'd made about people and success and what really mattered in this world. I chose Riverside Bistro for our date because it was the kind of place that separated the serious players from the wannabes. With its white tablecloths, wine list that started at $40 a bottle, and waitstaff who could pronounce French, menu items without breaking a sweat, it was exactly the type of restaurant where I conducted business dinners with potential investors. If this guy was going to be in my life, I figured, he needed to be comfortable in my world. I arrived 15 minutes early, as always, and secured the best table overlooking the river. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a midnight blue dress that cost more than most people's weekly salary, paired with heels that added 3 inches to my height and jewelry that caught the light just right. I looked successful, confident, and completely in control, which is exactly how I felt until Brennan Torres walked through the door. He was handsome, I'll give him that. Tall, with dark hair and the kind of build that came from actual physical work rather than expensive gym memberships. But the moment I saw him scanning the restaurant, clearly uncomfortable in his pressed khakis and button-down shirt, I knew this was going to be a disaster. He looked like he was dressed for a job interview at a bank, not dinner at one of the city's premier restaurants. "Cordelia?" he asked when he reached my table, and his smile was genuinely warm. "I'm Brennan, thank you for agreeing to this. Vivian said you might be out of my league, but I figured I'd take my chances." That should have been charming. Instead, all I could think was that Vivian had been right, just not in the way she'd meant it. We were definitely in different leagues, and I was already calculating how long I needed to stay to be polite before I could make my escape. The conversation started pleasantly enough. He asked about my company with what seemed like genuine interest, and I found myself explaining how we'd disrupted the small business software market. But when I asked about his work, expecting maybe some interesting stories about construction projects or career ambitions, he just said he worked commercial construction and was taking some night classes. Night classes in what? I asked, thinking. Maybe he was working toward a contractor's license or project management certification. Oh, just some computer stuff, nothing too exciting. He changed the subject so quickly to ask about my hobbies that I barely registered his evasiveness at the time. But it was when he started talking about his daughter Zara that I really began to check out mentally. Don't get me wrong, he clearly adored this kid. His whole face lit up when he talked about her science fair projects and her love of puzzles and how smart she was for her age. It was actually sweet in a way that made me feel slightly guilty for how uninterested I was becoming. She's been asking if I'm ever going to bring someone special home to meet her, he said, and there was something vulnerable in his voice that made me uncomfortable. I told her I was working on it, but that I needed to find someone really amazing first. That's when I made my first real mistake of the evening. Instead of just nodding politely, I heard myself saying, "That must be complicated, dating with a child. I imagine it limits your options quite a bit." The warmth in his eyes cooled slightly. It doesn't limit them. It just makes me more selective about who's worth introducing to her. I should have backed off, changed the subject, maybe even apologized. Instead, I doubled down. I just mean, professionally speaking, it must be hard to focus on advancing your career when you have those kinds of responsibilities. My career is advancing just fine, he said quietly. And Zara isn't a responsibility. She's the best part of my life. The tension at the table was becoming unbearable, so when my phone rang, I was almost relieved to see it was my friend Natasha calling. I should have let it go to voicemail, but instead, I answered, thinking a brief interruption might reset the awkward mood. "Hey Nat, what's up?" I said, turning slightly away from Brennan but not bothering to lower my voice. "Oh, that blind date?" "Yeah, it's exactly what I expected. Construction worker, single dad, the whole package. Vivian means well, but honestly, I need someone who can actually keep up with my life, you know? Someone who understands what it takes to build something real." When I hung up and turned back to the table, Brennan's face had gone completely still. Not angry, not hurt in an obvious way, just completely neutral in a way that was somehow worse than if he'd started yelling at me. "I think I understand now," he said, his voice perfectly calm as he placed his napkin on the table. "You're not just out of my league, Cordelia. We're not even playing the same game." He stood up, pulled out his wallet, and placed enough cash on the table to cover both our meals and a generous tip. "Have a good evening," he said, and walked out of the restaurant with his dignity completely intact while I sat there realizing I'd just revealed exactly who I really was underneath all my success and expensive clothes. 3 years passed and I barely thought about Brennan Torres. Why would I? My life was moving forward at breakneck speed. TechFlow Solutions had expanded to 3 offices. We'd been acquired by a larger tech conglomerate for $12 million, and I'd been promoted to Chief Innovation Officer with a salary that made my CEO days look modest. I bought a house in the hills with a view that stretched for miles, traded my Tesla for something even more expensive, and started getting invited to speak at conferences across the country. Vivian and I had gotten past our fight about the blind date, though she never quite looked at me the same way afterward. She'd mention Brennan occasionally in passing, how he'd started his own business, how well his daughter was doing in school, but I always changed the subject. Ancient history, as far as I was concerned. Then everything fell apart in the span of 2 weeks. It started with Data Secure Industries, our biggest client, representing nearly 30% of our revenue. They'd been using our software to manage their internal operations for 2 years without any problems. Then their IT department discovered what they called critical security vulnerabilities in our core infrastructure. Vulnerabilities that could potentially expose sensitive client data to hackers. The phone call from their CEO came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing quarterly projections. "Cordelia, we're terminating our contract immediately. Our legal team is reviewing whether we have grounds for a lawsuit based on the security risks your software has exposed us to." I tried to stay calm, tried to explain that no system was perfect, and that we could patch any issues quickly, but he'd already made up his mind. "We're also going to be transparent about this security breach with other companies in our industry. They have a right to know what they're potentially exposing themselves to." That's when the real nightmare began. Within 48 hours, 3 more major clients had pulled their contracts. The industry newsletter ran a story titled "TechFlow, Solutions, innovation, or security risk. That made us sound like amateur hackers masquerading as a legitimate software company. My phone started ringing constantly with existing clients demanding explanations, potential clients backing out of negotiations, and investors asking very pointed questions about our long-term viability. The worst part was that I didn't even understand the technical details of what had gone wrong. My lead developer, Marcus, tried to explain it to me using terms I didn't recognize, talking about SQL injection vulnerabilities and cross-site scripting attacks and encryption protocols that had apparently been implemented incorrectly from the beginning. How long have you known about these problems? I demanded during an emergency meeting with my entire tech team. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. We've suspected there might be some issues for a while, but we thought they were minor. The client never complained, so we focused on developing new features instead of going back and rebuilding the foundation. So you're telling me we've been selling software with security holes for 2 years, and you just decided not to mention it? That's when Marcus dropped the real bomb. Cordelia, I've been trying to tell you for months that we needed to invest in better security infrastructure, but every time I brought it up, you said it wasn't a priority because it wouldn't generate new revenue. You told me to focus on features that would help us land bigger contracts. He wasn't wrong, and we both knew it. I'd been so focused on growth and expansion that I'd treated security as an afterthought, something we could always address later, when we had more resources. Now, later had arrived with the force of a sledgehammer. Within a month, we'd lost over 60% of our client base. The parent company that had acquired us was threatening to shut down our division entirely. Half my team had quit to join competitors, taking their institutional knowledge with them. I was facing the very real possibility that everything I'd built was about to disappear. That's when I swallowed what was left of my pride and called Vivian. I need help, I told her, the words feeling like glass in my throat. The company is falling apart, and I don't know how to fix it. What kind of help? She asked, and I could hear the concern in her voice mixed with something that might have been satisfaction that I was finally admitting I wasn't invincible. We have security problems that are way beyond anything my remaining team can handle. Every cybersecurity firm I've contacted wants $200,000 just to assess the damage, and we don't have that kind of money anymore. I need someone brilliant, someone who understands this stuff better than anyone, and I need them to work for whatever we can afford to pay, which is basically nothing. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Vivian said, very quietly, "You know, it's funny you should mention that. Remember Brennan Torres?" The address Vivian gave me led to a sleek office building in the tech district, the kind of place I used to drive past and dream of having space in when I was starting out. Torres Cybersecurity Solutions occupied the entire 15th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows and modern furniture that probably cost more than I was paying most of my remaining employees. The receptionist, a young woman who looked like she belonged in a tech startup magazine spread, smiled professionally and told me Mr. Torres would see me shortly. I sat in the waiting area, my hands shaking slightly as I tried to prepare what I was going to say. How do you apologize to someone for being cruel and dismissive 3 years ago when you need them to save your life now? How do you admit that everything you thought you knew about success and worth was wrong? Ms. Nash? I looked up and there was Brennan Torres, but not the man I remembered from that disastrous dinner. This version wore a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than the outfit he'd worn to our date. His hair was styled differently, more executive than working man, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd built something significant. Behind him, through the glass walls of his office, I could see multiple computer monitors displaying code I didn't understand, and security diagnostics that looked like something out of a movie. "Please, come in," he said, his voice professionally neutral. No warmth, but no hostility either. Just the careful politeness of a successful businessman meeting with a potential client he didn't particularly like. His office was impressive in a way that made my chest tight with recognition and regret. Awards from cybersecurity organizations lined one wall. A framed master's degree from MIT hung behind his desk. Photos showed him speaking at conferences, shaking hands with executives from companies I recognized as major players in tech security. This wasn't just some guy who'd gotten lucky or found a niche market. This was someone who'd become genuinely, undeniably successful in one of the most demanding fields in technology. Vivian mentioned you might need cybersecurity consultation, he said, settling behind his desk. How can Taurus Cybersecurity help you? The professional distance in his voice almost broke me. I'd spent 3 years thinking of him as someone I'd dodged a bullet with, and now I was sitting across from a man who'd clearly built something far more impressive than anything I'd ever accomplished. Brennan, I started, then stopped. I'm sorry, Mr. Torres. I know I have no right to be here. I know how I treated you 3 years ago was inexcusable, and I know you probably think I'm getting exactly what I deserve right now. He didn't contradict me, which somehow hurt more than if he'd been openly hostile. My company is dying, I continued, the words coming out in a rush. We have security vulnerabilities that are destroying everything I built. Major clients are pulling out, we're facing potential lawsuits, and every cybersecurity firm I've contacted wants money I don't have just to tell me how bad things are. I've lost most of my team, my reputation is in ruins, and I'm probably going to lose my house. I stopped, realizing I was rambling, and looked at him directly for the first time since I'd sat down. You're the only person I know who might be able to help, and I'm asking not because I deserve it, but because 43 people still work for my company, and they don't deserve to lose their jobs because their CEO was too arrogant to invest in proper security infrastructure. Brennan leaned back in his chair, studying me with those same dark eyes that had gone cold at Riverside Bistro 3 years earlier. Tell me about the vulnerabilities. For the next hour, I explained everything I understood about our situation, which honestly wasn't much. He asked detailed technical questions I couldn't answer, made notes on a tablet, and occasionally shook his head in what looked like professional dismay. This is worse than you think, he finally said. Your entire system architecture is compromised. The vulnerabilities don't just put your client's data at risk, they put your client's clients at risk. We're talking about potential exposure for thousands of small businesses. My heart sank. So there's nothing you can do? I didn't say that. He set down his tablet and looked at me directly. I can fix this. It'll require completely rebuilding your core security infrastructure from the ground up. 6 weeks of round-the-clock work, maybe more. Most consultants would charge you $500,000 for this level of reconstruction. I don't have $500,000. I don't have $50,000. I know. He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see something shifting. In his expression, some internal debate playing out behind his eyes. I'm going to do it anyway. Why? The word came out as barely a whisper. Because 3 years ago you taught me something important about assumptions and prejudice. You assumed I was someone with limited potential because of my job. I assumed you were just another shallow executive because of how you treated me. We were both wrong, but only one of us gets the chance to prove it. Brennan didn't just save my company. He transformed it into something better than I'd ever imagined possible. For 6 weeks, he worked 18-hour days, rebuilding our entire security infrastructure from scratch. He didn't just patch the vulnerabilities. He created a system so robust that other cybersecurity firms started asking him to consult on their projects. When we relaunched TechFlow Solutions 2 months later, we weren't just back to where we'd been. We were the most secure small business software platform in our market segment. The clients came back, cautiously at first, then enthusiastically when they realized what we'd become. New clients started signing contracts specifically because of our security reputation. Within a year, we'd not only recovered our lost revenue but doubled it. Within 2 years, we were pulling in $25 million annually, and I was fielding acquisition offers that made my original buyout look like pocket change. But the real transformation wasn't in the company. It was in me. I'd spent my entire adult life believing that success was about being better than other people, about climbing higher and looking down on everyone below. Brennan showed me that real success was about lifting others up, especially when you had nothing to gain from it. He could have watched me fail and felt vindicated for how I'd treated him. Instead, he saved not just my company, but the livelihoods of every person who worked for me. When I tried to pay him after we recovered, he refused to take a penny. You can pay me back by being the kind of leader your employees deserve, he said. and by never again assuming someone's worth is determined by their job title. So I changed everything. I implemented new hiring practices that focused on potential and character rather than pedigree and credentials. I started a scholarship program for non-traditional students pursuing tech careers, specifically targeting single parents and people transitioning from blue-collar jobs. I began mentoring other entrepreneurs, particularly women who reminded me of my younger self, but hopefully with less arrogance. Brennan and I developed a friendship built on mutual respect rather than romantic interest. He became my company's cybersecurity consultant, but more than that, he became someone I could trust to tell me when I was making decisions based on ego rather than wisdom. We'd meet for coffee once a month, and he'd listen to my challenges and offer advice that was always practical and usually humbling. I learned about his journey during those conversations, how he'd worked construction during the day to support his daughter Zara while taking computer science classes at night, how he'd spent every weekend for 3 years studying advanced cybersecurity protocols, often falling asleep over textbooks after Zara went to bed, how he'd started his consulting firm with a single client and built it through word-of-mouth recommendations based purely on the quality of his work. "Why didn't you tell me any of this on our date?" I asked him once. "You didn't ask," he said simply. "You'd already decided who I was based on my day job. I figured if you weren't interested in getting to know the real me, there wasn't much point in trying to impress you with my night classes." 2 years after he'd saved my company, Brennan called with an unusual request. His daughter Zara, now 13 and showing exceptional talent in computer programming, needed a mentor for a national coding competition. "Would you be willing to work with her? She's been following your company's comeback story, and honestly, she looks up to you." Teaching Zara became one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. She was brilliant, curious, and had inherited her father's combination of humility and determination. During one of our sessions, she asked me innocently, "Ms. Nash, did you know my dad had a crush on you once? He said you were the smartest business person he'd ever met, even though you didn't think much of him at first." That's when I realized something that took my breath away. Brennan had never stopped believing in my potential, even when I'd crushed his feelings and dismissed him as beneath my notice. When my world fell apart, he didn't see it as an opportunity for revenge. He saw it as a chance to help someone he'd always respected despite how badly she'd treated him. The man I'd once judged as having limited potential had possessed something far more valuable than ambition or credentials. He had character. He had the strength to help someone who'd hurt him, the wisdom to see past surface judgments, and the grace to forgive without ever making me grovel for it. I thought success meant being above other people, but Brennan taught me that real success is about what you do when someone needs you to reach down and pull them up. Sometimes the person who saves your life is the same person you never gave a chance to know you, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, they save you anyway.